Thank you for joining our alumni webinar, Discovering Family, Genealogy and DNA Mapping, hosted by AFS-USA Board member and returnee, Julia Vollmers. My name is Luisa Gui, and I'm spearheading the alumni relations efforts as Senior Manager here at AFS-USA. I'm delighted to introduce Julia Vollmers to you. Julia is a program manager with the federal government in Washington, D.C. Her focus is data and technology exploitation, knowledge management, and development of custom analytical dashboards for a variety of customers. Prior to her work with the federal government, she spent 14 years in technology consulting at Booz Allen Hamilton. Outside of her professional career, Julia is a member of the Junior League of Washington, an organization of women committed to improving communities through the effective action and leadership of trained volunteers. She currently supports Community Family Life Service, a nonprofit that provides children, families, and adults with tools to move beyond poverty and homelessness. Julia has a Bachelor of Physics from the University of Virginia and an MBA from Georgetown University. She spent her high school junior year living in France through AFS, and after college continued to volunteer with AFS as a student mentor. Julia joined the AFS-USA Young Ambassadors from 2018 to 2019 before being appointed as member of the AFS-USA Board of Directors just this past summer. Julia is a native of Richardson, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, and she currently resides in Northern Virginia. Welcome, Julia, and now the word to you.
All right, thank you so much, Luisa. It's such an exciting pleasure to be speaking with everyone today. I took a look and it looks like we have about 40 or so people who dialed in. I'm so thrilled that you guys are spending an hour with me this evening. So yeah, you gave me a great background. I am very passionate about what AFS has done to help me grow into the person I am today. I spent a year abroad living in France, and actually I should be going over there back in November to visit that family again, and for that I'm very excited. And if anyone has any questions, please let's hold them to the end. But I'm very passionate about all the things I'm about to talk to you about. So with that said, I'm just gonna jump right into it. So I want to talk to you today about discovering family. And again, on this slide, genealogy and DNA mapping. By mapping, I don't mean where is it on the map. I'll show you what that means from a social network analysis perspective. Let's see. So we'll jump into this. So I can click on the next slide. So what I want to do today, I gave a brief introduction of what I'm going to talk about. I want to inform, entertain, of course, entertain, and then hopefully provide you some tools and inspire you to start doing this. I have been doing this work, as you're about to see, for a number of years, on and off. This is not something you can do in an evening. This is something you start working at a little bit, and then finally give you some of those resources that you can go and start looking at what I'll call your personal journey. So again, just as a quick intro, and I know Louisa already mentioned this, but I lived in France 22 years ago, and AFS is still a very important part of my life. And I don't know what the average age is of all the folks that have dialed into the call, but I think for my entire life, AFS will be a part of who I am. So jumping into the work that I've done, I've had a passion for ancestry over the last couple of years. And there are some people in my family who I know will roll their eyes when I talk about this, but this is something that's very exciting for a number of years for a number of reasons. This all started with one name and one city. That was the seed for everything. And I'll get to that in a couple slides. What really has enabled this is that we are in the world of technology, right? Internet, multi-source research. I think if you go back 50 years, if you looked at genealogy, you had to pay for somebody to go and look at the records. You had to go to the churches. Now, so much is digitized, and it's not just records, but it's really unique, clever ways of finding these sorts of things. I built a tree, a family tree of over 10,000 people. That number is a lot bigger at this point. And then I've also helped multiple folks and coworkers with their trees. And just as a small nugget, one of the things that I was able to do was help prove to a girlfriend of mine that she is directly related to one of the founding fathers from, I think it was like Vermont or New Hampshire. We were in the National Archives looking at a big mural of all the founding fathers. And she said, oh, I hear I'm related to this guy, Josiah Bartlett. And I said, no kidding. So within less than 2 weeks, I was able to put all those together. So that's just a quick note about the types of thing that you'll be able to do with some of the tools I'll show you tonight. For personal background, I start with the first slide that says my father passed away. I'm not telling you this to ask you to say, you know, I'm so sorry. But what that led to for my whole life is wondering, like, who am I? You know, I spent most of my life with my mother's family, and I've got a wonderful family. But there was always a piece that wasn't there. Who was my father? If I can meet some of his relatives, you know, do I find other connections? So I was able through this research to find other relationships with folks that are related to my father. And I've reached out and established relationships with those guys. So I put in italics there in the last bullet, research to find living relatives. And it's the tagline, I've got wanderlust, a passion with a passport. And as for those of you who know me, I'm always trying to get on a plane and get out of this country and experience more of the world. And I thank AFS for that. So one thing I want to talk to you guys about is many people do ancestry research, but they do it for different reasons. You may have multiple types of motivations. And these are just my personal terms, pride on paper. Some people want to say, oh, hey, I'm related to, you know, King George. I'm related to, you know, whatever, related to royalty. And I feel like I'm more of an interesting person because of where I come from on paper. Or maybe there's some societal context. You know, I know that my father's family, we were all farmers, right? Or maybe you come from royalty, something interesting about society. Other people in that third bullet do it, what I call legacy capture. You know, there's usually one person in some family who's the family historian who's collecting the pictures and putting them all together. And, you know, oh, my Aunt Irma, she's the one that knows everything about the family. So that family historian is really that legacy capture. I've done a little bit of that, but because it's all online, it's very easy to put together and share that with everyone. People want to find cursive connections. And then for me is the finding that living relatives and learning more about what makes me the whole person. So I will start this slide by saying I am not paid for. I am not supported by Ancestry. I don't own any stock in Ancestry, although I feel like I'm a superpower user and they should pay me. I would be their biggest advocate. There's a lot of other resources out there. I've tried many of them, but I can say from my personal experience, Ancestry is the easiest, has the most amount of data, and it's pretty powerful. Their record collection, you know, we talked about getting your, getting the census records or the phone book records or the church records, right? Those are the big easy ones, but Ancestry has a very, very large portfolio, and it continues to grow of other things around the world that they're able to add into their portfolio. Considerable user base, and that's very important when it comes to the DNA perspective, because again, this presentation is in two pieces. It talks about the family tree, right, and doing that genealogy research and having the documentation. And then I also talk about the DNA perspective, which is, it's interesting when you're able to put them all together. I do caution everybody, sort of a smiley face caution. This is very easy to learn and it becomes very addictive. So I can't tell you how many hours in total I've spent doing this research, but Ancestry is very good at saying, hey, we think we found 2 more documents that are related to this person. I'll open that up and take a look and do my own confirmation. So at the beginning, you want to make sure you're not spending too much time on it. So I talked for a second about what Ancestry does really well, and that's in the historical records. And what I put in italics at the top is read every line. Once you're going through and you find some documents, keep going down or go to the next page or read, you know, the flip side of it, because a lot of times documents are just on one side and you learn a lot more if you actually take the time to go to the next page and read the additional documentation. So what I've put on the slide here is 3 documents that are all related to my father's family. On the top left is that 1900 federal census. And so John, Maddie, these are all the Vollmers. And there's a lot of information that you can get in there. I know because I've read the whole thing. It will tell you, and actually for the 1900, it tells you not only the year that they're born, but the month. And as you go back in time, it becomes more and more difficult to say, hey, I have a John Lucy and a John Lucy, which is which? So if you're able to know, well, this John Lucy was born in October and this John Lucy was born in March, they're obviously different people. So every single nugget that you can get, you know, down to the level of what's their street address, if you're able to get that, that's really, really valuable information. Or things like what job do they have, right? Are they a baker? Are they in dry goods? Are they a farmer? Is it someone who's a homemaker or, you know, in shoes? If you go to the Midwest up near, you know, there was a lot of people in the shoe industry. So you saw that quite a bit. At the bottom, I've got the German phone book from 1911. And one thing I will point out, I'm sorry because it's cut off a little bit, but earlier on in the presentation, I talked about my journey kind of started with one name and one city. I was talking to my father's brother, you know, my uncle, and he said, oh, I remember my grandfather. He came from a town called Wiepenkaten. And sure enough, as I'm going through this, I'll see if I can get the mouse. Wiepenkaten, I should have moved the blue bar up, but there's that town. And I was able to see those words, something that my uncle was pretty sure he remembered, and now I saw it documented. That was pretty exciting to be able to put those puzzle pieces together. On the far right, I've got World War I registrations. One thing I didn't put any bullets on the screen was the more that you see some of these interesting documents, the more you're able to sort of learn about the people. You know, here's someone who, you know, registered for World War I, and you see a lot of people who fought in World War I and II. You see people who, you know, were lost in battle or missing, and that's, you know, you can imagine the impact that may have had on their families. So the more these documents, you're able to put all these pieces together, you can see where they went, you know, through time, when they moved, when they came to the US, when they were naturalized. For my mother's father, we were able to uncover a trip that he took for 3 months after, I think it was World War II, where we had the note of him leaving the US and going over to Europe for 3 months. And then years later, we were able to find the associated document showing his ship ride home back to the US after 3 months. And then later on, as we're going through his old, you know, personal papers, a report card of a summer study abroad that he did back in, I don't even know what the years was. But the fact that, you know, my grandfather studied abroad after World War I in Europe for 3 months and took classes, I think that's pretty much like his, you know, AFS experience at his time. So that was a really, really wonderful thing to find. And it was not just online. We were lucky because we had the documents in the house, but it's putting all those puzzle pieces together and being able to read every line and turn over every little rock that you're able to get your hands on. So the basic resources that you get from Ancestry, like I mentioned, are the phone books, census, military records. Those you can get pretty early. The last available census that's open, that anybody can read with full names and addresses and employment history, that's 1940. And they're only published every 10 years. And I forget off the top of my head when the 1950 one was open. But for you to start, if there's somebody in your family, your grandparent, who was alive before 1940, you're going to have that data. And that's a really good place where you can start putting that online. And if you can get that documentation, you get their name, you get their address, likely their birthday or birth month. And then their parents might have been born before 1930, in which case you got a whole new census records. But for this slide, for vital and overlooked resources, right? We're now in the world of the internet. Newspapers.com, yeah, you got to pay for it. But I'll tell you, they're constantly adding and digitizing additional newspapers. You find all sorts of incredible things in there. Marriage announcements, obituaries, and it sounds really morbid, but obituaries are an incredible resource, because it will say, you know, John and Lisa, you know, John just passed away and he leaves 7 children and 2 sisters, and it'll give you all of those names that you can use to feed and grow your tree. Other biographies and history books, for some of the, founding fathers and bigger names or town leaders, I think if you go back to my great-grandfather, when they came from Germany over to the US back in the late 1880s, he had a big plot of land. I want to say it was like 160 acres, and he was really big in the church and really big in the community. He's mentioned in one of the history books of the history of this Goodhue County. So if you go to some of these things and where your relatives and ancestors are from, start thumbing through a book, because they name some of the more prominent figures at that time. Other things that are kind of interesting is, I told you guys I was able to take my friend and find the direct relation between her and one of the founding fathers from either Vermont or New Hampshire. Well, just for kicks, I did a search on him, and I was able to find a book with all of his letters, right? People used to write lots of letters, like we do emails and sometimes text messages. So it was really neat to put that in our hands as a gift and to be able to go back and look at some of the things during his lifetime. And obviously Google and LinkedIn is also kind of interesting. If you're able to put connections together and find living relatives, you would be amazed. Although, because all you guys are probably better at the internet than I am now, there's an unbelievable huge amount of things that you can find just looking people up in Google or LinkedIn. Facebook is a really, really interesting one. I call it a big jigsaw puzzle. If you're trying to find information about someone, maybe you can find their brother's Facebook page, and maybe their brother says, hey, how's your son John? Aha, well, I know that this person has a son named John. Or maybe there's a picture of somebody says, oh, here's a picture of my grandma and grandpa back in 1902, and it's got their names. Well, there's more data. So it's really interesting to go through, not just on Facebook, but that person that you're trying to research, but people that are associated with that. Another thing I'll add in, I don't really have a bullet on this one, but for a long time, people didn't really move around like we do today with cars and airplanes and, oh, I want to live in Philly, and, oh, I want to live in LA, whatever. You looked at these communities that were in Europe or, the Midwest, families and communities sort of stayed together, and their children bought a farm next door. So you see last names of your family and your neighbor's family and your name's family. A lot of those last names will start to reoccur. And you will notice as you're going through your census records, oh, I see a Smith, I see a Jones, I see a, whatever else name. And then you come to Facebook and you see that, oh, there's somebody named Smith who married somebody named Jones. Well, that's really not a surprise, because families and communities, a lot of them used to move to where they knew that there was a friendly place to land. Lastly, professional genealogists, which can be very expensive or kind of cheap. Ancestry has a genealogical service. I have never done it because it is very pricey. It's like well over $1,000, and I don't think I need all that much help. I will say I did hire a German genealogist, and for 50 euros, which is what, like maybe 60 bucks, she physically went to the church archives and the state archives, and she was able to find original handwritten documentation of birth, baptismal, wedding records, birth records for folks in my family going back another 2 generations. And that would have never been possible had she not physically got in there. So you got to look around. But if you know that your family's from Ireland, I would encourage you to take a look at Irish genealogical societies, because there's a lot of resources there. Things in the US can be very expensive. And what I'll say in my last bullet is everything that you do, you got to think about it like an investigator. You cannot guess, because once you get back, John Lucy and John Lucy, they have the same name, but I refuse to guess that those 2 people are the same people. You've got to have as much data as possible. So here's a quick little story. We talked about history books, and I realize this is in German, and you can see my handwriting on the top. As I was ripping through the book, trying to translate everything. So 1887 was a really dry year, and we had a really bad, strict winter. It rained a lot, blah, blah, blah. and the grain harvest was delayed, and they could only get a little bit of hay. Hay is the H-E-U capitalized. Also, the potato harvest was not good. In April of 1888, the widow, Anna Vollmers, right, that's my last name, with her children, Fritz and Maria, went to Minnesota. When I saw this, I nearly fell out of my chair because my father was born in Minnesota. So Anna Vollmers, and now I have documentation, Fritz, which is a nickname for Frederick or Friedrich, and Maria. I went through and I immediately went into Ancestry and started typing that in. I found the passenger list of them leaving Hamburg, and you can see it, Anna, Marie, and then Fritz is underneath there. And do you guys see the name of this town? Wiepenkatten. That's when I almost cried a little bit, because that's the town where my uncle, my brother's father, said that his family, our family, came from. And then sure enough, this is the arrival of them coming from Hamburg to the US. Anna, Marie, and Fritz. And I have their ages, right? So 52, 17, and I guess it says 15. And it's a little bit fuzzy. I can't read what that is. But so if you do the math, you're able to say, oh my goodness, can you imagine at age 17 or age 15, not just doing a little, an incredible AFS year and then coming home and you've got the safety of this wonderful AFS network of volunteers. You're leaving your country for a new life. So when I was able to put all these three together, that was a really sort of personal, incredible moment for me, having that actual documentation. Let's see. Switching gears a little bit, this is more on my mother's side, and I'm afraid that this is in the way. I don't quite know how to move it, and I don't want to break anything, but it says, oh, I just messed everything up. History comes alive. So Owen J. Sinan, and if you see on the far right, you see the box, this is what Ancestry will do for you. So this is me, and it says, I'm the daughter of this person, going all the way up, all the way up, all the way up, all the way, blah, blah, blah. This guy, Owen Sinan, Reverend Owen Sinan, is my first cousin, fourth removed. And also Sinan is one of my middle names. So when I saw this, he was apparently really big in the community. And to be able to realize somebody that you're directly related to, look at all these newspaper articles. He was the son of this and this. He was the alderman of the city. He died at the age of, was that 37? I'm reading that correctly. And there were multiple newspaper articles day after day, hoping that he would live. I mean, look at the beauty of this writing, right? Wish of 1 week ago to live until Sunday is granted, and many friends surround his bedside. It's really beautiful. So all that sort of history sort of comes to life as you're able to find these people. So it's not just the census records, it's not just the military or whatever. It's, these are real people, and learning more about who they were helps give a little bit more appreciation to my life. And I would love to meet some of his descendants to be like, hey, how much do you know about him? So that was a really neat one. Let me see. Is it gonna go next slide? There we go. Okay, so I talked a lot about the ancestry and documentation and online research. Now I want to transition a little bit into the ancestry, DNA part of it. And if you guys have heard all these things about Ancestry and 23andMe and blah, blah, blah. Well, again, I'm not paid by Ancestry, but I think Ancestry DNA is far better than 23andMe. I've done them both, and I have far more confidence in the Ancestry version of their algorithm and their testing or whatever you want to call it. It's pretty darn simple. You spit in a tube and put it in the mail. Very simple. What it gives you is two things, and I'm only talking about the first one here. Your estimated ethnic background. And the reason I say estimated is because it's all based on what other people have said in their testing. If every single person that you happen to be related to lied and said they're from Idaho, well, your results are going to say that you're from Idaho. But I find that most people are pretty much honest. So if you go up my family tree, I know for a fact that I'm German, Irish, Swedish, French, Canadian. So when this all came back, it was very cool. Irish, All right, 34%, it's not unreasonable. England and Wales, well, maybe. I don't know of anybody that necessarily came from England, but if you look at that part of the world, there was a lot of international trade going on. There was a lot of people hopping on boats, right? So it's very likely that, my DNA does come from people who were living in England or did live in England. Sweden, yes, I know that to be true. And I don't know how to pronounce this, a bit Götaland. Yep, that has shown up a number of times in my research. Norway, I don't think I've seen anybody from Norway. And then Germanic Europe. And it's fascinating if you look at this, because as you get through it, this very small center dotted line, that's where that town is from. The Wiebenkatten that I talked about a couple times, we're from there. What I do know realistically is there's far more Americans who have taken the DNA test than Germans. So if you don't have a lot of data, then you're not going to have a high level of confidence. And the last thing I'll say about this is it's really interesting because day after day, more and more people are taking this DNA test. And I would say every 6 months or so, Ancestry sends me an email and says, hey, we have a much bigger population to compare against. So we are updating your percentages. The first time I got my DNA results back, it said it was 41% Irish. Well, I thought that was or 41% British, I apologize. And I thought, what in the world? I mean, it's not that far off, a couple countries over, but once, a year later, 6 months later, they updated the numbers. So I think if I log in today, it might actually have changed to be more realistic. So that's the part of the DNA. It's very neat. The coolest part, and I'll have to start by sort of getting you guys to think about this for a second. If you build your family tree, right, and I've circled myself in green and my mom and dad, or that blue line, well, if you remove yourself and then split it, you get two separate trees, right? You get your mom's side and you get your dad's side. Ideally, with no connections, because if you think about it, your mom and your dad should not have, blood connections, right? We as a society generally think that's not a great thing, but who am I to judge? But I would say generally that's the case, where the only DNA, if you erase yourself and any siblings you have, you get two totally separate trees with no connections. So now what I want to do is I want to translate that into the DNA side. So when you get your DNA results, it's not just where am I from and what country am I from. It says these are the people who have taken the test that you were related to, and it's in descending order. So the first one is my mom, right? That's in pink. It says parent-child. And it got it, there's a very big number, this 3,473. I'm not going to go into the numbers about what that means, but the point being, it's a very big number. They did a good job of saying, hey, this is a parent-child relationship. The next one down is my sister, and then so on and so forth down. What I put in that green box is said, the first couple people, I know who they are. I know my mom, I know my sister, I know my uncle, I know my grandpa. These are all people who have taken the test. But as you get further down, I don't know who this person is, and therefore I don't know if they're related to me on my mom's side or my dad's side, right? And so just like I said in the earlier one slide ago, some people should not, ideally, right, have a DNA connection. Your mom and your sister are related, yes. My dad and my sister are related, but my mom and my dad don't have a DNA connection, right? So what happens now when I plot all the connections, right? And again, you always start by removing yourself, and then you connect, well, my mom is related to my sister, my mom is related to her dad, my sister is related to my cousin. You put all those connections together. This is where the fun comes in. Now, I've skipped a bunch of steps because I don't want to bore everybody with all this super nerdy stuff. This we get into social network analysis. I don't know if you can read this word, but it says put it all together. So we already know what the family tree org chart looks like. That's pretty much perfect. There's a line from me to my mom, but there's not a line from me to my grandfather, right? But in the DNA, there is a line from me to every single person to whom I am related. And the terminology that we use in this SNA or social network analysis community is nodes and edges. Each node is a person or a relative of mine. each edge, which is a line connecting those dots, is a DNA relationship. So I'll sort of walk you through this. Again, you wouldn't expect your mother to be related to your father. So if you remove yourself, they should split. And sure enough, when I do my graph, and I want to say this is something like 500 people who were plotted in here. On one side is my mom's side, and the other is my dad's side. If, however, for some reason you were living in somewhere and maybe somebody on your mom's side, you know, had a baby with somebody on your dad's side, you would see that line and it would stick out like a sore thumb, right? Within this cluster of people, these are all closely related to cousins. If there's one person who had a line coming over here, you would see that and it would be obvious that, hey, something's a little goofy here. And you see all these interesting clusters start to form. And if you think back in history, there's interesting things like, oh, well, maybe the father passed away and the wife remarried and then she had 6 other children. Well, then that's another little cluster of quasi-related things. So why am I showing you all this? Well, I'll give you one quick little example, and then I'll move on to other things. But within Ancestry, you can actually reach out and contact these people. They don't give you their true name. It's whatever your screen name is. I could be Butterfly123, and you would see, hey, I'm related to Butterfly123. You click on that and send me a note, and then you and I can choose to start communicating. So I got a note from some lady a while ago, and we started chatting, and she said, yeah, I never met my biological father, but you showed up as a relative, and I was wondering if you could help me find him. I said, I'll try. Well, luckily you found the nerdiest person in this sphere of ancestry research. So guess what? We're looking at all these. Every single dot on both of these charts is a real person with an account that you can contact. So I looked, and she and I both had my uncle in common, my father's brother. So that tells me definitively she is related to me through a father. She's not related to me through my mother's side. So if I know that this is my dad's side and this is my mom's side, if I'm trying to find her biological father, nobody on my mom's side is going to be able to help me make that connection. So I went here and I was able to find all the people that we had in common. So I took the work that I had done with the DNA network map and then going up the chain and trying to find. So another thing is some of these people also have family tree org charts that they've built. So if we find somebody who is closely related to the both of us, and it turns out they also have a family tree, I start putting all those pieces together and I can say, the name Smith keeps showing up. When I look at people that she's related to and people that I'm related to, the name Smith and the same people keep showing up. So if I can find John Smith in her tree and John Smith in my tree and connect them together, we are getting closer and closer to finding. Well, to make a long story a little bit shorter, we eventually were able to get to like a first or second cousin of hers. And they got on the phone and the woman said, I knew your father. Unfortunately, this is kind of a sad story, but you know, he was in the military and he drank too much and then, you know, whatever. But it helped give her closure, and she found other people who she was related to. And I, you know, while it was sad because she, you know, her father had passed away, she at least knew where the story ended, and she was able to make connections with that piece of the story. Because those folks, you know, even though they weren't a fan of her father, they were arms open, you know, ready to welcome her in as a part of the family. So I thought that was pretty neat. This helped us get through a huge amount of mysteries in a much smaller amount of time. So every DNA network map is unique. Now this is kind of funny. On the left, that's mine, right? I just colored them red on this one. That's me. I think I said I get like 500 or so people that are plotted out and interconnected. The right, that's my brother-in-law. And there's not a lot of, he was born in Germany. And like I said, people in the US love hearing about their roots. When I talk to my friends in Germany and I say, hey, do you want to take the DNA test? They sort of cock their head to the side and they said, no, that's silly. I'm German. I already know that. So as you can see, each DNA map is unique. There's a different amount of information. I have a friend of mine who, her family comes from Britain. She has something like 7,000 people that she's related to. My computer crashes when I try to generate her network map. Most people that I found, you know, are like 1,000 or fewer, but you just never know. It's really interesting to see what your tree comes out to be. So I'll start with closing with some of the successes I've had. First, I told you that I was able to, in a very short amount of time, find a connection to my friend, her relationship to one of the founding fathers, 7 cousins once removed. That was very easy to do. It helped the founding father's last name happened to be her mother's maiden name, so we got lucky there. I have found cousins all over the place, right? On the far left, that's my, I'll call her my niece. She's in Germany. We're like 8th cousins, but you know what? Her grandfather took a DNA test and he comes up as a match of mine. So that was really wonderful. In the middle, I have family here in Virginia, and you know, now the one on the right side of the brown shirt, he's in high school playing football, you know, and I'm very lucky that I found them early in life and got to become a part of their life. And I text those little boys and ask how they're doing, and they've added a lot of joy to my life. And the far right, that's my niece in Milwaukee. You know, I go out to see her and her father, or her and her family, at least once a year, if not more. So that's been something that has brought me a lot of joy in my life. Lifetime commitment to love and support. You know, I just mentioned that in those pictures. 4th bullet, I found some of my grandfather's relatives before his funeral. My grandfather passed away a number of years ago. And because of the research that I've done and the magic of Facebook, I was able to reach out and say, hey, I'm sorry, this is kind of out of the blue, but are you John Smith? And is your mother Mary Smith? And they said, yes. I said, well, you know, ask your mom if she knows this guy. And we found a number of people who said, we'll be there. We'll be there for the funeral. So it was really wonderful. So we had people from all over the country come in. It was really terrific. Again, making connections and bringing people together. That's really what it's been for me. It's not just putting up a family tree on the wall. I actually do not have a family tree on the wall. For me, it's about having, you know, text messages and FaceTime and physically getting on a plane and going out to be a part of those families and establish those relationships. Saying the Christmas service at my German ancestors' old church. I mentioned the town Wiepenkatten a couple times. I've been to the little Lutheran church twice already. You know, I found some cousins over there and they took me to the church, and it was really, you know, you got hairs on the back of your head or on the back of your neck sticking up. It was very, very cool. I believe this is my last slide, but I have living relatives in Germany that I found. This is him. He's tall and skinny and with some red hair. I am not tall. I am not skinny. I do not have red hair, but we are related by blood. I met them on Facebook, and they were incredibly warm and welcoming. And at first I, you know, met for coffee, and they said, oh, you're great. You should come and hang out. And we spent more and more, you know, time communicating. I've stayed with them multiple times. They actually spent their vacation, their first vacation to the US. They spent a week in Washington with me. So this is my cousin Charlotte overseas, and I've seen her grow for about half my height to nearly taller than me. My cousin just recently got married, and I was in their wedding. So everybody is German. I'm the only American, but this has been, you know, I feel like I've got another little piece of a family over there overseas. And for me, that's the really magical part of it. I believe that's the last slide. Oh yeah, and this is the last one. This is my family in Milwaukee. For those of you that know me, I can be kind of silly. And it's not just putting a chart on the wall. It's not saying I'm related to the king, but for me, it's been making those connections. And this is my family, and I feel very at home, obviously with my own family. And I will say I am here at my sister's house right now, and she has 2 very young children, and it means the world to me to be here. And as soon as this call is off, I'm gonna go spend time with my sister, the closest related DNA match that I have. So with that said, I'll leave it open to questions and hand it back over to Louisa.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm truly in awe by your presentation, as I'm sure all the other 70 attendees of this webinar. I do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one, how far back can a person trace his or her lineage, both years and generations?
How far back? That's actually within Germany. That's actually pretty well documented. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it depends on where your relatives come from. For me, from Germany and Ireland, and I'm lucky because my last name is very unique within Germany, so it's easy to trace that back. For a long time, or the church had all the records. And at one point, I think this is back into like the 16 or 1500s, there was a fire that destroyed all existing records. So in some cases, it depends on how deeply you are able to go find the documentation. But in some cases, there just is no documentation. I've been, I don't want to say lucky, because we all are who we are. I have a friend of mine who's Greek, and I tried to help him with his records, and I couldn't figure out how to go back on the Greek records. But for Western Europe, Canada, they do, actually Mexico does a great job documenting. The US, the US is not a very old country. So at some point you really need to be able to find where people came from when they landed in the US, which is why those ship manifest documents are so powerful, because sometimes it confirms the city that they're coming from. And actually, if you flip to the page, it doesn't only say where they're going. It says, I'm going to stay with my Uncle Bill, who lives in this city, and he paid my passage, right? So your question of how far back can you go? I think I've gone back 7 or 8 generations. It depends, but you can get pretty darn far back. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. One more. Is every country included in ancestry DNA, like Turkey?
I am not 100% sure. It probably wouldn't be that hard to find out if you go to their website and look. But again, it's not like your DNA, there's no marker that says, I'm from Florida. There is no marker that says I'm from Australia. What you have is you have a marker that says you are similar to these 300 people, and they all said that they're from, Ghana. So if every person that you're related to says they're from Ghana, it's going to say you're from that region of the world. So if there's enough people from Turkey that took their DNA test and say they're from Turkey, and you have a similar DNA, then it should say that. So it's not so much by country, it's really by kind of region. Let's see if I'm able to go back.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so questions are coming in. So Lisa is confused, and she asked, she's confused as to where the DNA mapping social network analysis comes from, and it differs from the ancestry family trees.
So the DNA mapping, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to go back on this presentation. Oh, there's no back button. What am I doing here? It'll apologize. And so the DNA mapping, what this does is I'll show this slide. Let's see, will it allow me to go there? So when I click on myself, it says I'm related to my parent, my sister, and all these other people, right? And then if I click on my sister, it shows all the people that she's connected to. So each of those connections is a line, and each person is a dot on the map. So there are programs out there that will download all of this and generate the map for you, or you can do it one by one. So unfortunately, I don't have my personal laptop because I could show you that directly, but it comes from your DNA results. And if the person who has the question wants to contact me, please, Louisa, you guys are more than welcome to put us in contact. I'm more than happy to help that get started up. But you have to do, it's not from the tree, it's from the DNA results that you get.
I see. Thank you for that. Yes, Lisa, you can email us. And then one more question from Lynn, very interesting. Do you have any tips for those of us of African American ancestry in the US via the slave trade?
Oh, unfortunately, I don't. However, there are lots of resources out there, and I think the world is getting to a place where that documentation is coming more now. There is the African American Museum in Washington that opened up a couple of years ago, and I think if you go to their website, they probably have some wonderful resources. I fear that the African American documentation is not necessarily as good, but there's absolutely resources to help you navigate those. And I'm willing to take a look. It's just that's, you know, I've got family from Northern Germany, so we don't have any of that. But there's definitely resources and people who want to make sure that people are able to find those documents and be able to do that research. And I can, if you want, I can try to look some up and provide them to you.
Thank you. What are your suggestions for first-generation immigrants in the US looking for their ancestors? Where to start if I know that my native country isn't good at keeping records, or records are destroyed, or most relatives passed away?
Well, unfortunately, those are some of the biggest ones to start. But the great thing about at least the Ancestry website is write down as much as you know. Right? If there are no documents, there are no documents, right? But maybe there's old churches. And I will tell you, the world is on the internet. You can go to, you know, the church that my ancestors went to, they have a website, they have a newsletter. And many people in the world speak English. Or you can do Google Translate and translate into, you know, from English to another language and email that church and just say, hey, I'm living in the US. You know, my family is from, you know, XYZ country. Can you help me find whatever? There's lots of resources online. Many churches have websites, they have emails, they have a phone number. But I'd say, you know, and also newspapers. The newspapers is a great thing. But if you're first generation, wow, you guys have such interesting questions. I feel like all my research is really easy. Write down what you know, and then, you know, talk to your parents if they're still alive. If you have cousins, and then go on the internet and just go to Google and say genealogy resources for Ethiopia, genealogy resources for Turkey, you know, and there's a lot of stuff out there. I know here, I don't know where everybody's dialing in from, but here in Washington, at least, there's the, you know, German American Society, and they know additional resources and they can help you navigate some of that.
Great, thank you, Julia. One more interesting one around privacy. Is it true that once you submit your DNA sample, your DNA is then owned by Ancestry for research needs that they self-participate in?
That's a great question, because I know that's a concern. There are options, I think, to opt in and opt out of things. I do know my DNA is out there. When I also did the what's it called, the 23andMe DNA test, and I chose to not do the health because I don't want to necessarily know, and I don't want other people to know what my medical history is. I think both of those tests do a good job of explaining what the privacy is, and so I took my DNA test a long time ago before I even thought about it. Unfortunately, I know I'm saying a lot at the point, but they do. Because privacy is such a big deal, Ancestry does a really good job of explaining what your options are. You don't just blindly spit a tube and then put it in the mail. They've got, you know, lots of documents online, and there's something in, I think, the box to say, you know, check here to, you know, whatever. So I don't know the exact answer to that, but the information on is definitely up there on the website.
Okay, that was excellent. One more, do you Google by country, region, town, or church if you know its name?
I would try to go to the lowest level possible. If you know the town that your ancestors are from, type that in. Yeah, go look for it. A lot of times there might be, maybe there's a church in that little town. If you can find that church, go to their website. If you're not sure, type in your, family's last name with the region or with the state or the province or a country. Now, if you're lucky like me and you have a very unique last name, it makes your job a little bit easier. If my last name was something like Smith, I think I could probably get 3 generations back, especially on the Irish side. Everybody's named Patrick, everybody's named Anna. So you get 20 people named Patrick and their child's name is Patrick, and it's hard to keep track of who's who. So that's why it's so important to get as much little documentation as possible. But for your question about where do I go to search, I'd say when you're starting, write a list of the things that you want to look up and go through and look through all of them. Start at the smallest level. So if I have a town name, that's what I did, right? Wiepenkat in Germany, I typed in my last name plus that town, and it gave me a couple other things. Now, granted, people also lived in surrounding towns, and I was able to find that later. But with the smallest amount of data that you have, the smallest region, start there.
Okay, I'm sure that was very helpful. And this is the very last question. We're reaching the end of our dedicated hour. Was your German genealogist living close to where your family was from? I have relatives, Beth says, in both northern and southern Germany. Do you recommend getting 2 genealogists, one for each region?
I would, if it's something that you can afford and it's an option, I say absolutely. Because yes, to the answer to the first question, yes, the woman who I hired, and actually she was recommended to me by my German cousin overseas. So it was easy for her to take a weekend and drive to the church, right? And go into the archives and photocopy and take pictures. So if I had hired somebody in southern Germany, I don't think she would have gone all the way north. So I think it's best to get someone who's able to physically go to that town or that church. And you also, talk to the person before that. That's why I was so happy with her, because we had a lot of conversations, and she said, what are you looking for? How far back, and she asked me for what information I've already had, because it's too much work for her to start from the beginning. So I said, this is the furthest up my chain that I know. I'm looking for information on this person's parents. I'm looking for information on this person's siblings, and anything you can do going, upwards from there. So yes, it was absolutely helpful to have her be nearby so she could go to those towns. So if you're able to get 2 people in 2 regions, talk to them. It may end up being good to have them both. If not, if they can do research online, then do that. So yeah, the more data, the better.
Thank you from Beth. And I think we are closing this questions time. Thank you, Julia, for this truly fascinating journey. It was scientific and passionate, and we got a chance to discover all the new tools to find our ancestors. So that was really terrific. And thank you all for the great questions and comments. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Today's session was part of our enrichment and professional development webinars, and specially designed for AFS returnees and alumni. Thank you everyone for joining us, and see you at the next webinar.